Okay, so good morning, members, colleagues, and those who are listening to this recorded session. We're really delighted to welcome Professor Dan Laffoley today to this, oh, I'd forgotten to start my camera, to this first Marine Biology Live event. And as it's World Ocean Day, we wanted to start with a conversation to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in our relationship with the marine environment. And many of you might know Dan through his work with us here at the MBA, but Dan has also played a really pivotal role with his work on international work on marine science and conservation with his position as Vice Chair for the World Commission on Protected Areas. And he's been working at the global strategic level to change how people see and understand the ocean, and has met many of the great and good in science and politics. And your work started, Dan, growing up in Jersey and diving and a marine biology degree in Exeter, so you're homegrown. And I just wanted to start to ask you about your background and relationship with the Marine Biological Association. I assume that's been running for some time now. How did that sort of relationship start and evolve?
It actually started a very long time ago, many decades ago, when I moved to England, to Exeter, to do my undergraduate degree, and we would come down to Plymouth occasionally and go to the aquarium, as I would call it, before the National Marine Aquarium. And then over my career, as I've sort of developed and then risen up to the role of Marine Vice Chair, I've been involved not just with the MBA actually, but with other Plymouth institutes as well. External examiner at the university, on the Science Advisory Council of PML as well. And I think it's through the sort of role I had as head of marine conservation in the conservation agency that I got really engaged with Plymouth and the Marine Biological Association. I remember writing one of the letters of support to actually get the original funding for the National Marine Aquarium, for example, as one of those developments. And then through the work we did of protecting the marine environment around the UK, the special area of conservation in Plymouth, now the first marine national park in the country. And then also, I think, working with various directors of the MBA to try and bring resources in. One of the things I was particularly proud of was raising the money to enable us to safeguard some of the long-term data sets. So this was when climate change was on the up as an agenda, but government really hadn't made the connection and connected the dots. And so we created the Marklin project that actually rescued a lot of the data and packaged it up in a policy-friendly way. And I think that work still continues to date. And then I was acquired for MBA Council. And working on the education and communication stuff, which is what I still do. And I really enjoy it. It's been a very long relationship, shall we say, and many more years to come, I hope.
Great, yeah, no, that's lovely to hear. Yeah, and I'm glad that you helped with the aquarium starting out. That's where I started my career when I first came down to university in Plymouth. I had a part-time job there, so no, that was great.
Yeah.
And so the other sort of aspect of your work, you're Vice Chair for the World Commission on Marine Protected Areas as well. So for any sort of younger audience, we have young members that might be listening as well. Could you just explain a little bit, first of all, about what that commission is, and then how you're involved and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. So that commission is part of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and it's one of those global kind of bodies that if we didn't have it, we'd probably have to invent it. It's really where all the governments of the world, non-governmental organisations come together, and indigenous communities come together. So we've got about 1,400 members. Most governments are members, most non-governmental organisations are members. And in that, we also have 15,000 leading scientists from around the world. And their work, that's voluntary, they contribute time to the mission of IUCN, and their work is organised in 6 commissions. The biggest commission is probably the one that people are most familiar with, which is the Species Survival Commission. That's where endangered, extinct, these classifications for species comes from. But the second largest is the World Commission on Protected Areas, and we're effectively the figurehead body for the organisations around the world in terms of mechanisms, area-based mechanisms for protecting nature. And unbelievably, it was 15 years ago, I think, I was taken to one side at a meeting and asked, would I like to become the Marine Vice Chair, which is in effect, the figurehead role for all the conservation agencies around the world. I agreed, and then it's slowly sort of taken over my life, I suppose. But it's through that role that everyone can make a difference in this world, and it's through that role that I've helped facilitate the global targets. People sort of 10 years ago talked about protecting 20 to 30% of the ocean. That was on my desk, and then in Sydney World Parks Congress in 2014, I chaired a group of experts, which is where the at least 30% goal comes from. So it's also been about writing all the guidance for marine protected areas at a global scale for IUCN and interacting with the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. So I'm sort of living my dream in a way, but my dream seems to be a sort of 24-hour-a-day job at the moment. But it's all very rewarding.
Good. Well, it's good to hear that you're living your dream. And with your sort of involvement at that global strategic level, does that help you feel quite optimistic about the future of our ocean?
I think we're at a moment in time, and I think we still have time to do things. It makes me optimistic because we are the generation that knows. Previous generations didn't really know, and marine science has been, and we'll probably talk about this later, but marine science has been incredibly important in our generation, knowing and understanding. And what we know is that we're changing the ocean in effect. So it makes me optimistic from that point of view. And what I do hope is that as we move forward, we will sort of realize the situation we're in, and I guess especially after the last few months where everyone has in effect been touched by our unacceptably close relationship with nature and pandemics moving across, and hopefully more people will realize, which is where the sense of optimism I think also comes from, that we really need to do something. We are the generation that now knows, and we are the generation that needs to act.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great to hear of your optimism there. But the title of this talk is "Don't Do Stupid Things to the Ocean." So what are those stupid things? What's your sort of biggest concern of those stupid actions that we have that have an impact on our ocean?
Well, I said that saying once in a presentation, I think, and it's caught on. Because I do think we need to lift up and really look down at the overview of what we have and realize the predicament that we're in. And if we realize the predicament, we may end up doing fewer stupid things in the ocean, as I call it. And the predicament is the fact that, in my generation, it was just over 50 years ago, Christmas Eve, Apollo 8, that we looked back at the Earth, the famous Earthrise photo, which some say has been the most influential photo taken ever since in terms of our environmental consciousness. And it showed, our world from afar for the first time in wonderful colour, blue, finite, hanging in the dark void of space. And you wouldn't imagine in the 50 or so years since then that we would manage to change the blue bit. But our activities are managing to change the blue bit at scale of the whole Earth. So the ocean has become measurably hotter. It's tending towards more acidic conditions. And because it's warming and because of our discharge of nutrients from land, it's losing its oxygen. And more recently, we've discovered that we're even changing the speeds of the ocean currents, as well as things that influence the ocean, like the effects of winds on the ocean. And I think we need to understand and really realize our predicament in all this, that we are not in a situation where there is a never-ending bounty from the ocean and the ocean is going to continue to do all the things that it's done in the past. It's been shielding us from the worst effects of climate change, but that comes at quite a cost. And what's worrying is that that cost seems to be accelerating in terms of messages we see from marine science, and we need to do something about it. And I would say in all this that, you know, Plymouth, the CPR, the MBA have been a key part of kind of lifting people's awareness over what that predicament looks like. I think you're on something like about to be the 7 millionth mile of CPR or something like that.
Yes.
And it was and it was those early images that showed us our predicament. You know, the changing distribution of plankton, how we're pushing warmer water species up around the UK, we're squeezing the colder water species back towards the Arctic, and those were the first warning messages, but we've had many more since.
Yeah, and we've actually just had a paper released today, which is on our social media account, which is explaining exactly that shift of plankton. It's thanks to all of that 7 million miles of surveys, which is the equivalent of 9 round trips to the moon, that we've collected all of that information to be able to get that better understanding. So it's great that we have these technologies and these systems and these long-term data sets, like you said earlier. With the sort of the stupid things that we do, so as a society, that we may have a responsibility to do certain things that we're not aware of that has an impact of the ocean. Is there any particular things that you think as a society we should be considering more that has an impact that might not be understood or recognised yet?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we have been taught over the years that if you go to the garden centre and you buy peat compost, you'll be naughty, you know, because it's a carbon-rich habitat that we're digging up, and we should keep the carbon in place. And we've sort of learnt on land that it's a bad plan to either forest over peatlands or to dig them up, and we should leave that carbon in place. Same with the tropical forest, same with certain soil types. And it's bizarre to me that when you think about how we treat and manage carbon in ecosystems, well, until quite recently, it kind of stopped at the coast. You know, never a second thought was given to what was happening in, say, fishing operations to carbon on the seabed. A report that I led in 2009 was one of the first ones that really picked up this issue and put it into the policy arena, working with many marine scientists around the world, including in the UK. And that was the fact that some of these coastal ecosystems, like salt marsh, seagrass beds, mangroves and things like that, they may occupy a much smaller area, but they're very carbon rich. And we should actually, if we're being fair in policy, we should treat them in the same way that we're treating the carbon rich habitats on land. So there are some really basic things we should stop doing in the ocean, because you don't need all the kind of years of debate about this. If we've stopped doing these things on land and we're treating carbon in a particular way, so we should do so in the ocean. And so there should be a much larger conversation with the fishing industry and others, so that we maximize the potential of existing things we have in place, like marine protected areas. Surely in marine protected areas, we ought to be protecting not just the animals, but the carbon in the system as well, and keeping things in place. So whilst we may exploit the broader ocean, there are places where we're trying to do the right thing in a more comprehensive way. But this requires us bringing together the biodiversity debate with the carbon debate. And one of the things I'm very keen on is that we simply package this up. This was actually where the title of this presentation came from, when I stood in front of DEFRA and various other people and said, well, at basic level, you just need to stop doing stupid things in the ocean. You don't need to debate this. We need to just do these things. So I think it's things like that. And I think it's also, as we look to the renewable sort of energy and the electric car kind of generation we're going into, we need to be thinking about stopping doing things like even starting deep seabed mining. We need much better recycling of these things. You know, we can't keep going on exploiting things, so we better stop doing stupid things and start being sensible about it.
And do you think there's enough awareness within the sort of wider global community about what those pressures are, and something is able to be done to prevent them, like the deep sea mining, the fact that seagrass has so much potential for storing more carbon for a longer period than, say, terrestrial forests? And yet when you hear a lot of the discussions about climate change, those aspects might not be mentioned. So is there anything that you think could be done or is being done to help sort of share that knowledge and that understanding?
There's a lot being done on coastal carbon now, which is great, but I think it needs to expand much more widely to treat with sensitivity many other habitats that are involved. So I think that is on its way. But I think what people need to realize when we look at deep sea mining, or we look at the profits of big multinational companies that make your telephones and things like that, you know, they've got big profits because they're not dealing with the end product, which is then discarded and then needs to be recycled by other people if they can do it. Apple has got something I think called Daisy, which is an automated system to disassemble up to 5 models of iPhones to strip them back so we can get the rare earth metals out of them. But that's more of an exception rather than a rule. Most people don't realize, compared to lead acid batteries in cars, which have a 98% closed recycling, that there isn't really recycling for these batteries in the electric cars at the moment, and there should be. So one angle General Motors is going is getting the batteries to perhaps go for 600 miles on a charge and to last for 1 million miles. But on the other side, we're still doing very poorly, which is about recycling the batteries that are in the existing generation. I forget how many Olympic swimming pools just the batteries from 1 year's sale of electric cars in the UK would fill as unrecyclable waste at the moment. So we need to be really understanding that there are other things we need to do alongside what are called kind of environmentally friendly choices. And I think deep sea mining is one of my things which I really think shouldn't happen, because where else in the world would you do something where you have no monitoring framework in place, you've not proven the technology, and yet you're licensing people to do things? You know, we're going ahead of ourselves in a way because we haven't done some of these other areas of the agenda that we really need to be pushing on hard.
And so, I mean, you're saying about this sort of deep sea mining areas. So with your work in marine protected areas, they often talk about a coherent network, which is going to protect different habitats. Do you think we're reaching that? And does that include some of those deep sea areas as well as sort of others that are more kind of more recognised as coastally important habitats and environments?
So in inshore areas, out to the limit of where countries have influence, the edge of what's called the exclusive economic zone, countries really are trying to put in place marine protected areas. And I think you see different strategies. In some places, you see large marine protected areas where we stop doing the damaging things, we stop doing stupid things in the ocean. In other places, it's about getting the coverage and then following up with much more improved management. Where we have a real kind of battle is actually on nearly half this world, which still doesn't have a conservation framework, which is the areas beyond the jurisdiction of coastal countries, what we sort of call the high seas. And there's a whole debate going on in the United Nations at the moment to get an agreement. I mean, I think to most people it would seem really bizarre. Most people actually, we've seen from polls, think more of the ocean is protected than it is. And I think a lot of them would be very surprised to know half our world doesn't have a conservation framework like we have on land. So you go to national parks and things like that. We can't do it out there. And so we've seen a real arms race going on out there where the mining industry that hasn't proven any of its technology is leasing areas of seabed to countries at a time when we're trying to identify places and put measures and debate the measures to put measures in place. And I have to say they're doing quite a good job at locking out areas of seabed that would otherwise probably be of conservation value. So there is a real urgency and issue involved here to get ahead of that curve, so that we don't find, when we eventually get measures through the United Nations to protect the open ocean, that a load of these places have been licensed for exploration to countries really behind closed doors. So very few people know this is going on. There's an area in the North Pacific which is 80% the size of the contiguous United States of America that has been licensed for exploration, with a few token reference areas for conservation put around the edges. That is really not what anyone is used to in terms of what is considered acceptable behaviour anywhere else on this planet. So, really serious issues, some in nearshore, getting ahead of it, but a lot more to do.
Sure. Okay. So that's kind of where we are now. So let's kind of do a bit of time traveling now, if you like, and imagine our marine world, our marine environment in 50 years' time. In your ideal world, what would you like to see in 50 years, and how do you think we're able to reach that point, and what can we do as maybe sort of different groups? What can we do within society? What can we do as scientists? What do politicians need to do to be able to realise that future that you're sort of pipe dreaming for 50 years' time?
Well, I think there's several things here. The first is, as I said earlier, marine science has an incredibly important part to play in all this. And, when we look to the future, we have these warning signals of heating, acidification, deoxygenation going on. And what I hope in 50 years' time, every generation has more knowledge than previous generations. Every generation looks back at previous generations and judges. We look back at the post-war year generation and we're not living in that era, but we look back and go, if only they hadn't destroyed those habitats or done this, that, and the other, we would be in a better, stronger position. And what I hope in 50 years' time is that the next generation look back at our generation and go, well, do you know what? They were different. They realized what the problems were. And what I hope they say is that they acted. What I hope they don't say is that they just continued as normal. Because with all the trajectories of all these things, we are the time that is really critical to make the changes in how these things roll out with regard to losses of biodiversity, impacts on ecosystems and climate change.
Sure. And with that sort of that vision as well, then in 50 years' time, what do you think individuals, I mean, we have sort of a member audience, and this is open to general public as a talk afterwards, so they might like to know what they can do to help reach that sort of future potential too.
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at this. First of all, if we don't do things we need to do, the consequences, I think, will start touching everybody. You're all connected to the ocean. You don't realize perhaps how connected you are to the ocean, whether it's our weather patterns, whether it's the air we breathe, the water we drink, whether it's actually at a fundamental level, the cycling of nutrients necessary for life on Earth. We're all connected in some way. And so everyone will be touched by the ocean. And I think what we've shown over the last sort of decade or so is that everyone has a part to play. Whether it is making more sustainable choices, whether it is demanding more things need to be done. I was talking about the kind of battery issues and recycling earlier. Everyone has a voice. There's campaigns around the world where I think they're take 2 or take 3, where you go to the beach and you take 2 or 3 pieces of plastic back and have them properly recycled. So I think everyone has a role to play. And I think what is increasingly important, and we see this on the news, for example, with the climate strikes and things like that, is everyone has a voice and everyone can help determine what we need to do. And it is actual fact only through those routes that I think we will instigate change. There's not many politicians who lead a procession before there's a procession. So you need to kind of give them a procession to lead. And I think we can find leaders to keep pushing and keep making changes in all this,
Yeah, sure. And then back to the scientists again. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me so much about our ability to better understand our ocean and the situation we're in is the fact that we have such incredible technology. We had a talk from Professor David Sims recently about an upcoming grant that he's received, which is looking at the impacts of deoxygenation and the sort of the coverage of sharks in relation to that, and some of the techniques that he's using, satellite tagging and things. I mean, for me, it's mind-blowing that we're able to remotely look to see where a shark is when we're sat back in Devon, and get so much information. And do you have any sort of thoughts in particular how technology might help us better understand, better communicate, anything that will reach that 50-year potential again?
I do, and I think it is happening already. So if everyone casts their minds back to Google and Google Earth, that's what I call a first generational shift. So the first generational shift there, regardless as to how you or I feel about people looking in our back garden or looking at our house, on one day or so, Google changed the privacy laws and enabled people to see the world as never before. And that was when Google Earth was created, and that legacy lives on in Google Maps. The second generational shift is the one we'll see any day now, with these small suitcase-sized satellites, cuboid satellites, and these constellations that are going up. So up until now, really, there's been the excuse that, well, my data is proprietary data. You can't see what I'm doing out there. Well, that is going to disappear because there are so many different satellite systems going up that people already know where all the boats are. They know where all the ships are. There's some amazing technology that doesn't even use cameras. It listens for the transmission from a radio. And you can locate where all the vessels are, including actually what the names are of some of the vessels, by triangulation from these small satellites in space. We have satellites that see through cloud now, synthetic aperture radar. And the motto of one of those companies is every meter, every hour, every day. So this second generational shift will come that we as the marine community, the MBA as marine scientists, needs to be engaging with. And it's great, the sort of work you see on the forefront of this with David and others, but there'll be more to come on this technology. And that's the second generational shift. Then the third generational shift that we're working on at the moment, I'm an advisor to a program in America, is looking at what is becoming the reality of actually being able to physically map the ocean. A lot of the ocean is mapped from satellite height telemetry at the moment. And the day will come when we get a third generational shift where we will be able to actually really understand and see the real contours of the whole ocean. That is a little way away and a few $1 billion worth away as well, I would say. So with the world economy at the moment, that may be further away than we think. But we will see this progressive change. So the exciting thing in a way is, well, we have the problem of the problems getting worse in a sense. Our technology understanding and ability is getting stronger than better than ever before. And at some point, what I hope is that people will understand and realize that you mess with nature at your peril.
Great. And you mentioned Google, but you failed to mention the fact that you're involved with a very exciting project, or actually created the 3D ocean Google Maps. Would you perhaps tell everybody a little bit more about that and what it does and what you had to do to create it?
Yeah, so this is so one of the joys of the role that I've had over the last 15 years, as you probably tell from some of my opening remarks, is if something needs fixing, I can try and help. Or I can try and help develop things, and I have a bit of freedom to be able to do that at the sort of global scale. And when Google Earth was first created, it was actually a project that Google bought. It was originally called Keyhole, and it was when a lot of the satellite stuff was being declassified. And the original Google Earth had the land in what was then wonderful quality. And the ocean, the bulk of the planet was this flat blue thing, which really got to a few of us. And in the original Blue Planet series, there's a guy I was at university with called John Riven. And when I became Marine Vice Chair, we met up and he said, well, we should do something about this. And I said, well, I know someone in America called Sylvia Earle, and let's see what she thinks. And in the end, we teamed up to a group of 28 advisors, and we got Google to rebuild Google Earth, put a three-dimensional ocean on it. And that is actually what then encouraged other providers to do digital ocean technology. And in fact, every time you do a Google map search, you'll see a sort of 3D representation of the contours of the ocean. So within a year or two, about a fifth of the planet had downloaded the new technology. This was back in 2009. and it kind of lives on. And so one of the other ways we can influence things is by working with providers like Google and others to change people's perception. I mean, Google actually, we were kind of discussing it, and Sylvia, I think, said to them, it's more like Google Dirt. You've done a great job with the land, but what about the ocean? So that kind of annoyed them slightly. And then I think the other thing was the fact that we set them the challenge to go inwards on a virtual sphere. So going outward was easier than going inwards and having sea level at 0. And it took Google about 3 years to work that out. So it was a great sort of example. And we're trying with the Cube satellite industry to do similar discussions at the moment. So as this technology comes online, in the same way as that enabled everyone to see maps, you should be able to see what's happening in the ocean. It's all our ocean, especially the high seas as a commons. So we should all be able to see these things. So we've not stopped really with Google. So that was an early one, and we're pushing forward to try and get more technology released as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that sort of perspective and insight into our ocean not being a blue flat surface is so important. And it was something that Sir Alistair Hardy recognised. It was in one of the introductions of one of his books. I can't remember the exact quote, but he was saying about what a shame that people only see a horizontal surface and can't see a vertical image of all of the marine life involved. And that some of us as divers and people like Sylvia Earle, who uses deep sea submersibles, has the lucky opportunity to see. But you mentioned Sylvia Earle as well. So you're also part of a group called the Ocean Elders. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what they do and how you became involved in that?
You've been doing your homework on me.
I'm an active social media user, so I
Yeah, so another thing we created, it was actually created over a breakfast discussion on a trip, was why don't we, there had been the elders, influential politicians and well-known individuals on land. Why didn't we get a similar situation in the ocean elders? And I encouraged that to kind of happen. And we have an amazing array of people, from Queen Noor to Prince Albert to Leonardo DiCaprio to Richard Branson, you name it, who are now sort of engaged with ocean issues. So when we kind of have had particular issues over encouraging countries to do stuff, it's been quite heartening to have one of the ocean elders. Right, they normally know the kind of leaders of countries and write to the leaders and get a telephone call and sort of say, well, why don't you do this, and encourage behind the scenes. So it's another way in which we've been driving the sort of endeavour forwards. So it's not just about trying to designate things in the ocean. There are many different ways, and the Google was one of them, where we influenced how people saw the ocean. Ocean Elders is another. New technology or other ones, because I think you need the problem is so large and goes so deep, excuse the pun, that you really need a multifaceted approach if you're going to actually really push forward on progress.
Yeah, great. And just sort of touching on what we're very much all aware of right now, this sort of COVID-19 era. It's obviously had a big impact on all of our lives and made us think quite differently about some of the things that we do to our ocean, the things that we do on land, the impact that our relationship with nature has had. So how do you think we can kind of capture that sort of learning experience and make it something that has an impact on our ocean?
So I think there's some interesting parallels, and we need to really think hard about our position with regard to the natural environment. So COVID-19 was the most recent of several attempts of viruses to jump to humans. So you think of MERS and SARS, you think of H1N1 and other ones which we don't really even have common names for. Over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been an increased frequency as we become in closer contact with nature and with species for a lot of these things to try and jump across to humans. And we look at the ocean, and when we actually look at where the political warning signs have arisen, a lot of them have arisen since 2004, since 2000. 2004, ocean acidification. Even though scientists have been working on these things, it's how they break through into the political arena. 2004, ocean acidification. 2016, ocean warming or heating. 2019, ocean deoxygenation. 2019, 2020, a lot of the Argo float stuff about how the ocean currents are changing and things like that. The lesson we need to learn from things like COVID-19 is, like money in your life, you don't spend it all, you invest some, because there's always the rainy day situation and the unanticipated occurrence of things. And countries knew it wasn't a question of if, it was when, with a pandemic, and it will be again unless we do something and we change our relationship with nature. And when we look at the ocean, all these warning signs, that whole ocean scale, sort of, the scale when we originally saw it 50 years ago, it's that sort of scale. We're changing the ocean. And we are still discussing what percent of the ocean we might protect. And people are arguing, well, should it be 30%? Why not just 10%? We're completely out of kilter with nature and the forces that actually sustain life on this planet. And I think one of the things we need to learn from COVID-19 is that we actually need to invest for a better future, and we need to respect nature, and we need to sort out what that relationship looks like. And I think the other thing is that we need to, excuse the sort of simplicity of the argument, stop the political squabbling. So the climate change measures have to be seen hand in hand with the biodiversity conservation measures. We can't have one thing over here with the UN and one thing over here with another part of the UN. We're going to have to be much more joined up, much clearer direction on some of these joined up initiatives, and we're going to have to act with a lot more ambition. We're well into the problem already, is the issue. So perhaps it will give us a wake-up call. Perhaps people will realise that even though they're personally not connected with trade in wildlife or something like that, what that small proportion of the community is doing is putting the rest of the community at risk. In the same way we're overburdening the ocean, only certain people are involved in that, but it will ultimately put a lot of people at risk.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It sort of feels like this time for pause has given a lot of people an opportunity to reflect on lots of different things about the way they conduct their own lives and the impact that has, and hopefully will sort of impact the relationship they have with the ocean as well. Today is World Ocean Day, so this is a day to sort of celebrate and share our kind of love of the ocean. What's your particular message on World Ocean Day? Is there anything particular that you think people need to do today, or the benefits of a day such as World Ocean Day?
Well, I think part of it is reflecting on our relationship with the environment, and as you've said, we've all had plenty of time to do that, and I think a lot of people yearn to get out into green spaces and reconnect with nature. So I think World Ocean Day, coming in the middle of this, gives us an opportunity to reflect on our relationship with the processes that drive the planet and the fact that we can all make a difference. I was that student who paid to come into the aquaria to look around, and I was determined I might do something. And, what I see when I look around me at the young professionals who I know and mentor and things like that, is even in a world of 6 billion or more people, individuals can make a difference. Everyone can make a difference with regard to the choices they make. But if you want to pursue a career and you want to make a difference, it's still possible not only to do that, but actually to try and help change things, So I think there's I have a great sense of optimism that, as I say, we're the generation that knows, and certainly the way I see it through the conversations I have with the younger generation, people I mentor, but many others, is there is an absolute refusal to kind of accept the status quo and that we're going to change. So everyone makes a difference, and let's all keep making differences.
Absolutely. And I think that whole sort of the choices we make as well. And I think children are particularly aware of that. And it's partly because of the sort of plastics movement and all sorts of other sort of environmental campaigns that have made them think about the impact of simple actions that they may take day to day. And I think that's really exciting then, that people are starting to just have little slight changes in the shifts in their habits and how that may affect us long term. So some of the choices that people might make is to be a marine biologist, as I did in my early years. And came to Plymouth, became a member at the Marine Biological Association, used to come into the library and look at all the lovely books, and then my career and pathway ended up back in the Marine Biological Association. So for all of the marine biologists that are listening, do you have any particular message for them in terms of what they can do, might do, should do, or anything else that you'd like to say?
Encourage all your friends to love the ocean. I think it really is. I think it really is about. I think you sort of get the bug in a way. I mean, you said you sort of come back to the MBA. I'm still connected to the MBA, and I think it is about the fact that through the work of the Marine Biological Association in particular and others, we can give that sense of community and that sense of voice. And I think it's important that that voice is heard. And we need as many people and as many eyes on and in the ocean as possible as we go into this massive period of change. You know, people like me in however many years, whenever I'm allowed to retire, I might retire, but probably not. But it's going to be the next generation that's going to take on these challenges and have to make the tough decisions if we don't make tough enough ones right now. So it is a really important role to play, because at the end of the day, we're an ocean planet, not an Earth planet, perhaps wrongly named. And so all power to you, really, in terms of pursuing careers and helping make a difference.
And I guess today on World Ocean Day, it's now that you can start sharing and celebrating all of the reasons why you joined that career and all the things that you love about the ocean as well. And I think it's that conversation that engages people, that passion that really involves people into the sort of the marine sphere of knowledge, understanding, enjoyment, all of those sorts of things. So, and it was particularly for me something that was so important during my career, to see other people be enthusiastic and be passionate as you have today, Dan, to want to become involved in that conversation. So it's great that you've been able to join us today to help share your enthusiasm and passion for all things ocean. So I'm now going to pass this on to John, who's been monitoring the questions that we have from our audience. So John, would you like to switch the microphone on? Thank you, Dan.
Hi, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Maya. Thanks for a really interesting conversation and lots of food for thought there. Rowena has been leading a charge to ask you about deep sea mining and how much political will do you really think there is out there to protect the open ocean?
I think the problem is how deep sea mining is being handled at the moment. So there is something called the International Seabed Authority. Think it as a club of countries that would like to exploit the deep sea ocean, who actually license themselves to do it. We would never allow a planning authority to, or someone who owns a house to license themselves to build a house. And yet in the ocean, different rules apply at the moment. There's a massive push for greater transparency around that body and greater accountability around that body. But equally, there is a massive push from countries, given who is sort of buying up on land, if you like, the reserves of rare earth metals we need for all these televisions and iPhones and car batteries and things like that. So that, as I say, there's sort of this arms race at the moment in terms of one side trying to get control and the other side trying to drive on regardless. And at the end of the day, I think, we talked about 2050 and things like that. I think we will look back, if we don't make some better decisions, people will look back going, well, why didn't you? You knew that these were finite resources and we've got all this stuff which has been squandered, and you should have made a better effort at recycling and a better effort at personal responsibility in this. But the political pressure at the moment is definitely driving to, at any cost almost, get rights to these areas and extract the metals. And they're even using the argument that the conservation organisations are standing in the way of a green future if they don't allow them to mine the deep ocean. It's that bad.
Right, and following on from that, then, Have you got any suggestions on who to contact and to complain of deep sea mining? Is it what action can people take?
I think you can take action with your MPs and you can take action with your governments. Your governments are all part of the international the international framework. The UK goes to the UN meetings, and you can put pressure that you don't think that this is acceptable. I think through non-governmental organisations, a lot of the non-governmental organisations are involved in the international debate on this. Those that are connected to the ocean in particular, become a member, ask them what they're doing about it. It is, again, one of these things where many voices will drive change. I think the fact that people are even now realizing that people are wanting to do these things with what seems to be, compared to land, minimal constraints and scrutiny. They've licensed an area for exploration. There's a place called the Lost City on the Atlantis seamount in the Atlantic, which has these giant calcite spires up to 60 meters high, a really unique place. And the International Seabed Authority knew about that, but they still licensed a country for exploration rights right up to the limit of it. And they were even told before the vote, but hold on a minute, this area is of World Heritage status, and they ignored it and continued. That's the sort of pressure. That's what we've got to overcome. So many voices will help turn that.
Excellent, thank you. There was another question to do with about the MPAs, and you were talking about the fact that we can see a lot more now, we can use technology, but realistically, how do you see MPAs being policed?
So one of the things that I'm actually having discussions on that this week and last week. One of the things that we need to do is that we are starting through initiatives like Global Fishing Watch to be able to utilize the new satellite technology that is coming on board. And indeed, there are trials to look at this on individual MPAs. My issue is that you need a scalable, global, easy access solution to this. So it's great having trials that may benefit one MPA, but with thousands of MPAs around the world. And the issue is that we'll need to scale up this technology, just in the same way as Google bought Keyhole and showed you all maps of the world. Before that, you had to go and buy a map in a shop, so to speak. So they transformed how we saw information using technology. And that's what we've got to do at a global scale. Because if, as a matter of course, every MPA could see how it was being used, that enables you to think creatively with limited resources about how you solve the problems. If you can't see in the first place without massive amounts of money and energy, despite the fact, as I say, right now, there are satellite companies who know where all the boats are. They know where everyone is. And they can, as I say, see through clouds. They can do this, that, and the other. So we've got to scale up the technology to enable to help. We're never ever going to have a lot of money in many regions of the world for sort of effective management. That's the reality. What COVID-19 has done is actually remove a lot of the effective management for many places because it was dependent on touristic income. So we're going to have to find ways we can improve it using technologies, and then reposition how we look at dealing with the biggest problems in each MPA.
Okay, and possibly linked to that is the question of sustainable fisheries in the context of protected areas and maintaining, improving biodiversity. So again, we're saying we can see these boats, but you really have to act at a global scale and global agreement, I guess, for sustainable fishery.
There's still a bit of a distance to go to push the fishing industry and the people who represent them to recognise that things are going to have to change. I get sat in front of people in big UN events who show how marine fisheries and aquaculture is going to feed the world, and their graph doesn't show how the effort has increased over the decades and the collateral damage has increased, because it's a kind of clean image of these things. So we're going to have to still put a lot more pressure on the fishery organisations to realise that they can be seen as part of the problem, but if they evolve and change, they can definitely be part of the solution. They have the opportunity to have these discussions with the industry and to invoke change, and that's what we need to do. Ultimately, the solution in the future is going to be about true sustainability, intergenerational sustainability, as opposed to sustainability that may be only in someone's mind for 3 years or so, or 4 years. And it's going to really be about making space for nature in this as well. We will get increasingly hit by episodic events, periodic events, as climate change won't unroll evenly in the ocean. Various places will get hit and other places will get hit. And unless you've got places you can replenish from, we go downhill quicker. So actually getting that balance much better will be important. Sustainable fisheries is part of it, but if you don't make space for nature at the same time, then where are you going to recover from when we didn't get it quite right? And the history of fisheries, I'm afraid, until very recently, is we didn't get it quite right. Some people would say we got it very badly wrong.
So you say we might have got it very badly wrong, but to be clear, do you see a future for sustainable fishery?
At a vastly reduced level, yes, I guess so. But this has to be as part of a whole ocean approach. So I think the other big shift that we need, when people say, well, how much of the ocean should we protect? I reply, all of it. It's no longer the case when you see at scale, whole ocean scale, these impacts occurring. And, you have one sector which says, well, we'll protect 20% or at least 30%. Even if you're successful in that, and I've sort of set out some of the challenges and how we need technology to help us, but we'll still have a deficit on money. But even if you're successful in that, the danger of that strategy is you create islands of hope in a sea of despair, because you just simply push the pressure elsewhere. So you've got to alleviate that pressure considerably. And we've got to actually look realistically about the position which we're working on at the moment. In a lot of cases, we've lost a lot of the productivity and we've lost a lot of the benefits over the years, but the graph sort of tends to forget some of those things, that we can't return to them. And yet one of the most remarkable things about the ocean right now, despite everything we've done to the ocean, is it still has a propensity for recovery. Where we put in place highly protected marine reserves, for example, at Lundy, around the UK, when I was head of marine conservation, we saw nature bounce back. We've had stories during COVID-19 of nature bouncing back. And so there is a different way where you might actually be able to do better by fishing less if you actually look at a much larger whole-scale equation of change.
Excellent, thank you. And a question on carbon sequestration. Do you think we will need to get to the stage where the only realistic option left for carbon sequestration is fertilizing the ocean?
Well, the problem with that, and it has been looked at, is well, there's various sayings you could attach to this. The first thing is not necessarily the best thing to do, or the one I like is unintended consequences. So on the face of it, it might seem like an intervention worth taking, but certainly the experiments which they did had unintended downstream consequences. And I don't know how comfortable countries would be if you're doing this at scale and the unintended consequences drift into your economic zone and affect your productivity of people who have been doing the right things for sustainability. I think the issue is it's an excuse to avoid doing the things we need to do now. And the things we need to do now is radically scale up ocean protection, radically improve sustainability, radically improve our enforcement and surveillance. And I say the technology is there, it's a matter of how you join it together, and radically cut carbon emissions. I mean, this is the system that keeps us all, it keeps life just right. And what we know from the Earth's history is if it gets too hot, species die. If it gets too cold, species die. It's the ocean that just keeps it quite right. And the most worrying thing, I think, is that we have the warning signs in what we're creating very rapidly. that were the signs of the last 5 extinction events on Earth. So at what point do you decide, well, let's stop messing around with fertilizing the ocean and let's actually do the things we need to do? We know what they are. This is what the next generation is going to look at and puzzle about why we didn't do some of them, because we worked it out, you know. So we need to get on with it, and I feel things like that are a pander to, well, it doesn't really matter if we don't do these things because we can do that. Well, where do you stop? You know, at some point you've got to change.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for answering those questions. I'll hand you back to Maya now. But thank you for an excellent talk. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And that was a great final note then to end on, to say, when are we going to change? It's been a really interesting conversation. And I think I could spend all day chatting to you. I'm sure people enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed chatting to you today. It's a really great way to start off the first of our Marine Biology Live series. So thank you for being part of that on today, a very special day on World Ocean Day. And we should have a screen sharing now from John. It's just coming up. So just to say that we will be continuing the Marine Biology Live series. We've got another speaker in 2 weeks' time who will be talking about, John, have you got the screen share there?
Yeah, it should be there.
There it is. So it's from Aisling Smith from the British Antarctic Survey, and it's about the about her experience exploring the polar ocean. So it should be a really interesting talk, and please do join us for that on Monday the 22nd of June. So a big thank you for you for joining us, whether that's being live today from our members and staff, but also for those who are listening for the recorded sessions as well. And just to let you know that if you do want to join these sessions live, then I would strongly encourage you to become a part of the community of the Marine Biological Association and become a member, just as I did in my student days. It's very easy to do so. You can just click on this link here, and by joining as a member of the Marine Biological Association, you not only can join these live events, you receive quarterly the Marine Biologist magazine features, magazines, but more importantly, you can then become part of this united voice of marine biology, which I think is so very important. So thanks again, Dan. Thank you for joining us today, and we're so lucky to have you as part of our community as well. And we look forward to seeing some of you again at the next session. Thank you very much.